8 years into our marriage, heavily pregnant. I had just secured a $50 million contract for Carter Vance. But the moment I walked back into the office, I caught him and his new secretary locked in a passionate embrace, passionately making out. My body trembled with rage as I confronted them. Yet, all I got in return was a sneer from the young girl. So you're the famous charity case scholarship girl Carter sponsored back in college? Look at you, so tacky and plain. You don't look like Mrs. Vance at all. Carter has me now. If you have any self-respect left, get an abortion, sign the papers, and get lost. I slowly turned my gaze to Carter, who was standing beside her. Though he didn't say a word, his bowed head and avoided gaze spoke volumes. Taking advantage of their distraction, I quickly slipped the signed $50 million contract back into my designer bag. A cold smile played on my lips as I looked at my husband. Carter, after all these years as husband and wife, I only need one word from you. Do you actually dare to divorce me? I had married into the Vance family when Vance Tech was on the verge of bankruptcy. For 8 long years, over 2,000 grueling days and nights, I relied on my own research and dozens of patents to bring Vance Tech back from the dead. Even Carter's snobbish parents used to treat me with absolute respect. I honestly thought Carter understood what was at stake. Chloe, let's just get a divorce. Carter stared at his own expensive shoes, mumbling those 6 words. His voice wasn't loud, but there was a sickeningly firm resolve behind his feigned helplessness. Suddenly, a sharp, deafening ringing buzzed in my ears. A symptom that had plagued me ever since I got pregnant. In my belly, the baby gave a sudden, violent kick. I lunged forward, grabbing Carter by his silk tie. Are you serious? I am 5 months pregnant. You want a divorce now? Carter let me yank his tie, refusing to meet my eyes or utter a single word of defense. The anger inside me burned hotter. This was always Carter's way when things got tough. Avoidance. Silence. Just as I was about to scream at him, a high-pitched, mocking female voice cut in. Oh, cut the drama, you rabid dog. Carter is only being nice because of your history. When a man asks for a divorce once, it's already over. If you had any dignity, you'd pack your bags and roll out. Haley Bennett was someone a business contact had begged me dozens of times to slip into our company. I never expected to recruit my own nightmare. I made a mental note to make that contact pay dearly for this later. But Haley took another step forward, getting right in my face. Are you deaf? I'm talking to you, you trailer trash she-devil. Before she could finish her sentence, my hand flew out and delivered a ringing slap across her face. That slap was to teach you how to speak to your boss. And this one, I raised my hand again, aiming for her other cheek, is to teach you how to speak to a wife. But before my palm could connect, a large, firm hand clamped down on my wrist. Carter looked at me with a complicated, guilty expression. That's enough, Chloe. If you want to hit someone, hit me. I drank too much that night and got Haley pregnant. She's young, and I have to take responsibility for her and the baby. It felt like a lump of cold ash was wedged in my throat. My chest surged with absolute fury and betrayal. But I couldn't squeeze out a single word. Carter had health issues. For Haley to get pregnant so quickly seemed less like an accident, and more like a carefully orchestrated trap. Suddenly, it hit me. A few months ago, Carter, who used to chain smoke, had abruptly quit. When I asked him about it back then, he had wrapped his arms around me with tender affection, and whispered in my ear, Chloe, you're pregnant now. For you, the baby, and our future, I have to quit. I had actually thought he was finally growing up, ready to be a real partner. Turns out, he was just preparing his body to conceive a child with this cheap little girl. My stomach suddenly churned. I leaned against the wall, dry heaving uncontrollably. Carter rushed forward, trying to support me. Chloe, I'm sorry, he whispered cautiously. I know I messed up. I'll give you time to process this. As long as we get the divorce finalized before Haley gives birth, that's all I ask. Please try to understand. Haley's baby can't grow up without a father. The scent of his familiar cologne drifted into my nose, making me feel even sicker. I violently pushed him away, forcing a cold, lethal smile as I stared him down. What is there to process? We're divorcing. Right now. Then, I shifted my icy gaze to Haley's barely visible baby bump. Her kid can't be without a father, and neither can mine. Let's get this done quickly, so I can find a much better dad for my son. A flicker of panic flashed deep in Carter's eyes. Chloe, Carter. She already agreed. Why are you stalling? Get the divorce papers out. Haley pouted, cutting him off. Before Carter could even react, Haley had already grabbed the pre-printed divorce agreement and shoved it into my hands. I scanned the terms and a cold, hysterical laugh escaped my lips. Carter Vance, 0 shares of the company for me? Chloe, Vance Tech belongs to my family. Besides, I funded your college tuition for 8 years. In all fairness, you have no right to these shares. I had been grateful once. That was why I married him when the Vance family was at their lowest. Over the years, dozens of tech giants had offered me hundreds of millions for my patents. But I had let the Vance family use them for free for 8 years. 90% of Vance Tech's clients only signed with us because of my patents. And now, Carter wanted me to leave with absolutely nothing. Chloe, if you're really unhappy about it, I suppose I could transfer a tiny fraction of my personal shares to you. No need, I said, grabbing a pen. I'll sign. We're divorcing right now. Once this marriage is over, forget your petty shares. The entire Vance family will soon find themselves holding a hollow shell. The moment the ink dried on my signature, Haley let out a mocking chuckle beside me. I don't get why you're still acting so proud. A divorced, pregnant trailer trash woman. Let's see how you survive without Carter. Unlike you, Carter has my family's backing now. Within a year, he'll easily become the richest man in the city. I stopped in my tracks and cast a chilling side eye at Haley. Her family? I vaguely recalled her belonging to some old money family in decline, but I couldn't quite place the name. I tossed the signed agreement onto the desk and turned to leave. Just as I reached the door, Carter called out to me. Chloe, did you sign that $50 million contract you went out to negotiate today? I slowly turned around, a sweet, mocking smile on my face. I did. But I just sent a message to the client telling them the contract is canceled. Carter, we're divorced now. I have no interest in working like a dog for the Vance family anymore. I'm sure you understand. The otherwise quiet and passive Carter suddenly erupted into a furious rage. Chloe, do you have to be this ruthless? Gritting his teeth in anger, he snatched his phone and dialed the client's number. The moment the call connected, Carter instantly forced a greasy, sycophantic smile onto his face. Mr. Sterling. Hello, this is Carter Vance from Vance Tech. Carter Vance? Who the hell is that? At Vance Tech, I only deal with Chloe Miller. The next second, the line went dead. Carter desperately dialed back, but every call went straight to voicemail. In a fit of rage, Carter slammed his phone onto the marble floor, glaring at me like he wanted to rip me apart. Chloe, do you have to ruin us? Do you know how important that $50 million contract was? That was almost our entire profit margin for the year. I shrugged, utterly indifferent. I know, but what does that have to do with me? Haley quickly rushed to his side, rubbing his back and whispering sweet nothings. Carter, babe, don't worry. It's just a $50 million contract. I'll talk to my grandfather when I get home. Forget $50 million. He can get you a $500 million deal with a snap of his fingers. I smiled and walked out of the building. Behind me, Carter's furious, resentful roars echoed down the hallway. Chloe, getting rid of you was the best decision of my life. I never realized what a vicious, disgusting bitch you really are. Ignoring his pathetic screams, I dialed the contact who had forced Haley into my company. Julian, what is the background of that little girl you had me hire? Oh, her. Julian Brooks laughed over the line. She's the spoiled heiress of Apex Holdings. Well, what's left of it? Old man Bennett practically begged me for 5 years just to get a meeting with you. He probably figured sending his granddaughter to butter you up was his best shot. They want your patents. They figured if you could save the Vance family, you could save the Bennetts too. The foggy pieces of my memory suddenly clicked together. During the last few industry summits, a frail, elderly man had bowed politely to me, with a decent-looking girl hovering behind him. A quiet sneer escaped my lips. So Carter and Haley were playing a game of mutual deception, both trying to leech off each other's non-existent fortunes. How entertaining. I was in Julian's office telling him about Haley's grand performance, when his assistant knocked and entered with a pale face. The assistant hesitantly leaned in to whisper to Julian, but Julian pushed him back. Chloe is family. If you have something to say it out loud. The assistant trembled. Mr. Brooks, our building is being swarmed by reporters. Why are they swarming us? They're demanding a statement from Ms. Miller. Julian and I pulled out our phones at the same time. The moment I saw the trending headlines on Instagram and Twitter, my heart sank into a cold, dark abyss. Out of the top 10 trending topics in the city, I occupied 3, highlighted in blood red. Viper in the house. Vance family's charity case cancels $50 million contract to vent personal malice. Vance Tech's wife betrays husband. Secretly pregnant with a boy toys child. Chloe Miller's calculated scam. The truth behind her parasitic marriage to the Vance family. Then came a barrage of emails and messages from my clients. Ms. Miller, we need an official explanation regarding these scandals immediately. Otherwise, we may have to reconsider our partnership for the next quarter. Chloe, let's put our ongoing negotiations on hold for now. There were even vicious messages from anonymous internet trolls. You disgusting whore. I'll spit on you if I ever see you on the street. Ungrateful snake. I hope your baby is born a freak. I clenched my fist and slammed it on the desk. This was clearly the work of Carter and Haley. The moment I notified the clients of my departure from Vance Tech, these smear campaigns had flooded the internet. They wanted to utterly ruin me. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door, but Julian caught my arm. Chloe, you're pregnant. Don't go out there. Let me handle this. I gently shook his hand off. Julian, I dragged myself out of hell to get where I am today. A little rainstorm isn't going to break me. But the moment I stepped out of the lobby, I realized why Julian's assistant had been so terrified. Because besides the bloodthirsty paparazzi, there were several prominent figures from the city's high society standing at the entrance. Among them were Carter's parents. Eleanor Vance spotted me from a distance and immediately put on a fake, warm smile, rushing over to grab my hands. Chloe, sweetie, I don't know how things got so out of hand. It must be because of that $50 million contract. Did we upset Mr. Sterling? Richard Vance stepped forward too, forcing a reassuring smile. Yes, Chloe. Canceling a signed deal so suddenly. It's natural for the client to be upset. Just go apologize to Mr. Sterling, get the contract back, and I'm sure these reporters will leave you alone. I slowly peeled Eleanor's manicured hands off me and smiled. Actually, Eleanor, Mr. Sterling isn't upset at all. I just signed a new deal with him through a friend's company. He is actually thrilled. I watched the color drain from the elderly couple's faces. A cold sneer formed in my heart. It seemed they had a hand in this media circus today too. I had bled myself dry for the Vance family for 8 years, only to realize I had been feeding a pack of ungrateful wolves. Eleanor's face instantly twisted in anger. Chloe, what did you just say? You signed Mr. Sterling with a friend's company? You are the daughter-in-law of the Vance family. How dare you betray us like this? I met her furious gaze, reached into my bag, and slapped the newly signed divorce agreement into her hands. I'm sorry, but I have absolutely nothing to do with the Vance family anymore. I pushed past Eleanor to leave, but the hundreds of reporters waiting outside swarmed me like vultures. In my 8 years of running a business, I had dealt with the media countless times. I knew that the more I spoke now, the more they would twist my words. I turned toward the back exit, but a sharp, mocking voice cut through the noise. Oh, look at the elegant Chloe Miller. What's wrong? Did we hit a nerve? Running away, because you can't face the truth. Haley, clinging tightly to Carter's arm, strutted toward me. I ignored her and kept walking, but before I could take 2 steps, someone grabbed my wrist in a vice grip. Haley jumped in front of me, pointing a finger right at my nose. Let me tell you, Chloe, don't think Vance Tech is nothing without you. 50 million is pocket change. Even if it's 500 million or 5 billion, it's just a phone call away for me. Mrs. Vance was kind enough to give you a way out, and instead of being grateful, you disrespected her in public. Get your ass over here and apologize to her right now. Carter chimed in, his face cold and arrogant. Chloe, you crossed the line today. If you don't apologize to my mother properly, you aren't leaving this place. As the drama unfolded, the crowd grew larger. I could see the luxury cars of several major business partners pulling up down the street. It seemed Carter and Haley had really planned this trap thoroughly. While I was looking away, a sharp pain erupted from my scalp. Haley had grabbed me by my hair, violently dragging me toward Eleanor. In the chaos and shoving, I lost my footing and crashed hard against the concrete stairs. A careless reporter tripped over me, and his heavy camera slammed directly into my lower abdomen before he fell right on top of my body. An excruciating, stabbing pain shot through my belly. A second later, a warm, wet sensation began to pool beneath me, soaking through my clothes. Eleanor stood over me, looking down coldly. Haley yanked my hair again, forcing my head up. Do it. Apologized to Mrs. Vance. Looking at the blood pooling beneath me, Eleanor showed a brief flicker of hesitation. After all, she knew my value to their business better than Carter did. But just as she bent down to help me up, Haley cut her off. Mrs. Vance, don't waste your pity on this snake. Don't worry about the business. Leave it all to me. I already spoke to my grandfather about that $500 million project. The contract will be signed, and the money will hit your account in no time. Hearing the mention of $500 million, Eleanor's eyes lit up with greed. When she looked back down at me, her face was filled with haughty disdain once more. Chloe, you're a grown woman, yet you're not even half as sensible as Haley. For old time's sake, just apologize to me, hand back our clients, and we will let this go. Haley stepped closer, whispering maliciously in my ear as she looked at my blood-soaked pants. You worthless trash. You couldn't even keep your husband, and now you can't even keep your baby. Once my grandfather transfers that $500 million to the Vance family, your real living hell begins. I gritted my teeth, forced myself up, and landed a vicious slap right across Haley's face. Your grandfather is on his way. Let's see whose living hell begins then. Haley gasped, her eyes wide with shock. Just as she was about to slap me back, a deep, booming voice echoed from the entrance. Haley Bennett. The booming voice did not just cut through the sirens and the click of shutter lenses. It shattered the fragile illusions of everyone standing on the granite steps of the Brooks Tower. A vintage Rolls-Royce Phantom had pulled up hard against the curb, followed by 2 black SUVs. An elderly man with silver hair and a hand carved of cedar cane strode out. He was Arthur Bennett, the patriarch of Apex Holdings, a man whose name still carried the heavy iron weight of 3 generations of industrial steel and telecommunications infrastructure. Behind him rushed 3 private physicians in white coats, carrying an emergency trauma stretcher and oxygen canisters. Haley froze, her hand still raised in the air to strike me, her face flushed with victorious malice. "Grandpa," Haley squeaked, her voice instantly shifting into a sugary innocent whine as she dropped her hand and hurried down the steps. "Grandpa, you came just in time. Look at this ungrateful woman. I was just teaching her a lesson for disrespecting Mrs. Vance, and she..." Slap. The strike was so heavy, so dry, and so utterly devoid of hesitation that the sound echoed off the glass facade like a gunshot. Haley spun around from the force, crashing onto her hands and knees on the wet pavement. Her cheeks swelled instantly into a dark, mottled crimson, and her designer sunglasses shattered on the curb. The entire plaza dropped into a dead, breathless silence. Eleanor Vance's eyes bulged. Carter took an involuntary step back, his jaw slumping open. "Shut your vile mouth, you worthless parasite." Arthur Bennett roared, his chest heaving beneath his tailored wool coat, his cedar cane shaking with pure, unadulterated fury. He didn't spare Haley another glance. He turned his eyes toward the blood pooling around my legs on the concrete steps, and the color drained from his face until his skin looked like wet chalk. "Dr. Morrison, move," the old man screamed, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "If anything happens to Ms. Miller or that child, I'll personally tear your medical licenses to shreds. Get her onto the gurney now." The medical team swarmed the stairs. Gentle, gloved hands lifted my shoulders and knees, sliding a rigid backboard beneath my spine. The sharp, tearing pain in my lower abdomen made the edges of my vision blur into a pulsing red haze, but I kept my teeth clamped together, refusing to let a single cry of weakness escape my throat. Julian Brooks burst through the glass doors of the lobby, shoving 2 stunned cameramen out of his way with brutal force. He dropped to his knees beside the stretcher, shucking off his heavy cashmere overcoat and tucking it securely around my shivering shoulders. "Chloe," Julian's voice was ragged, his hand steadying the oxygen mask over my face. "Hold on. The neurovascular team at St. Jude is already scrubbed in. I've cleared the transit corridor." I looked through the plastic mask at Arthur Bennett, who stood trembling beside the gurney, his silver head bowed so low his forehead nearly touched his hands on the cane. "Mr. Bennett." I rasped through the oxygen mist, each breath scraping against my ribs like sandpaper. "It seems your granddaughter's $500 million check is going to be slightly delayed." Arthur Bennett fell onto one knee right there on the dirty concrete, in front of 50 live broadcast cameras, weeping in open, humiliating terror. "Ms. Miller, please," the old man begged, his voice trembling before the entire city's press corps. "Apex Holdings has 4,000 workers whose pensions depend on your next-generation optical processing patents. We are 40 million in debt. We don't have 500 million. We came to beg for a licensing lifeline. This wretched girl has no authority, no money, and no brain. Please spare my family." The reporters in the front row let out a collective, sharp gasp. Cameras swung violently from me to Carter Vance and Eleanor. Eleanor stood frozen on the steps, her manicured fingers clutching her pearl necklace so tightly the silk cord looked ready to snap. Her mouth parted in silent, paralyzed disbelief. Apex Holdings was broke? Haley had no money? The 500 million was a lie? Carter's face went from pale to an ashen, rotting gray. He looked at Haley, who was sobbing on the ground, holding her bleeding face, and then at Arthur Bennett, kneeling at my feet. "And no," Carter stammered, stumbling forward, his eyes wild with a sudden, sickening realization. "Mr. Bennett, you're joking, right?" Haley said he showed me the bank balances. "She said she was your primary heiress." Arthur Bennett lifted his head, his pale eyes burning with pure murderous hatred as he looked up at Carter. "You greedy, incompetent little worm." Arthur spat, his words broadcasted through 30 live television microphones. "My granddaughter was an intern whose allowance I cut off 6 months ago for credit fraud. She stole my letterhead to forge corporate guarantees. And you threw away the greatest technological genius of this generation for a pathological liar and a worthless trust fund." The stretcher began to move, rolling rapidly toward the trauma ambulance. Carter lunged forward, his hands reaching desperately for the edge of the gurney. Chloe, wait. It's a misunderstanding. I didn't know." Julian didn't even turn his head. He delivered a brutal, short-range elbow directly into Carter's sternum. Carter crumpled onto the pavement with a loud, hollow gasp, clutching his chest, coughing blood onto his polished leather shoes. "Get your hands off her, Carter," Julian said, his voice cold enough to freeze bone. "From this second forward, if your shadow falls across Chloe Miller, I will dismantle Vance Tech brick by brick, and I will bury your parents in the rubble." The heavy rear doors of the ambulance slammed shut with an airtight seal. The sirens wailed to life, cutting through the autumn rain as we tore through the crowded streets toward the hospital. The private surgical ICU on the 12th floor of St. Jude's Medical Center smelled of ozone, sterile saline, and the sharp, metallic tang of warmed blood bags. I woke 18 hours later. The persistent ringing in my ears had receded into a dull, rhythmic thrum, synchronized with the green waveforms on the neonatal cardiac monitor beside my bed. A gentle, steady beat. Thump thump, thump thump, thump thump. My hand drifted instinctively toward my abdomen beneath the white linen sheet. The swelling was bandaged with a firm, cold compression pad, but beneath my palm, I felt a faint, stubborn flutter. The baby was alive. Placental abruption was grade 2, Dr. Morrison said, stepping into the room. With a chart in hand, Julian walked behind him, holding a steaming ceramic mug of bone broth. You lost nearly 2 units of blood, Ms. Miller. If Mr. Bennett's trauma unit had arrived 90 seconds later, we would have been forced to terminate the pregnancy to save your life. How long do I have to stay in this bed? I asked, my voice dry but completely steady. Absolute bed rest for 72 hours, Morrison replied, adjusting the 4-drip of magnesium sulfate. After that, strict outpatient monitoring until the 36th week. Thank you, doctor, I said. Morrison bowed respectfully and stepped out, clicking the door shut. Julian set the broth on the nightstand, pulled up a leather armchair and opened a black carbon fiber laptop on his knees. Carter has been sitting in the ground floor lobby since last night, Julian said calmly, his fingers tapping the trackpad. Eleanor brought a silver thermos of bird's nest soup this morning. She's been kneeling outside the security perimeter, telling the nurse supervisors that she is your loving mother-in-law, and that this is all a domestic misunderstanding. A dry, razor-thin smile touched my lips. Did she bring the media? The media is already outside, Julian replied, turning the laptop screen toward me. Except they aren't reporting on a domestic misunderstanding. They're reporting on the total market collapse of Vance Tech. On the screen, the financial ticker for Vance Tech was flashing in violent, deep red. Vance Tech, NASDAQ, VNTC, down 48.6% in pre-market trading. Sterling Industrial cancels $50 million procurement order. Apex Holdings terminates all CO development talks. Securities and Exchange Commission opens inquiry into disclosed intellectual property transfers. How much time is left on the enterprise licensing agreement? I asked. The 8-year master grant you signed during your first year of marriage expired at midnight yesterday, Julian said, sliding a digital signature pad and an encrypted hardware token onto my lap. Under Section 9 of the Patent Charter, if the inventor does not execute a renewal addendum within 24 hours of marital dissolution, all sublicenses granted to Vance Tech terminate automatically. I looked at the hardware token, a small, titanium cylinder engraved with my initials and the cryptographic seal of the World Intellectual Property Organization. For 8 years, I had used this key to grant Carter's family access to 42 core international patents, the quantum encryption protocols, the low-latency optical switches, the neural network compression models that formed the entire nervous system of Vance Tech's cloud infrastructure. I had given it to him for free, because I thought his clumsy promises in that cheap college diner meant something. I thought love was an investment that paid out in loyalty. Julian, I said softly. Yes, Chloe. Revoke the keys. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner of the hardware token. A green confirmation dialog popped up on the screen. Execute global IP revocation. Patents 001 through 042? Confirm. I hit the button. Across the city, inside the 30-story headquarters of Vance Tech, 1,600 commercial servers simultaneously lost their cryptographic certificates. The core algorithm ceased compilation. The optical switching hubs in Chicago, Frankfurt, and Tokyo went dark. The empire built on my charity vanished into an ocean of null-pointer exceptions. At 10:15 a.m., the main operations floor of Vance Tech descended into absolute, screaming chaos. Red warning strobes flashed across the ceiling of the Central Network Operations Center. Dozens of software engineers were slamming their keyboards, staring in horror at the cascading error logs filling their monitors. Server cluster 4 is down. The optical decryptors aren't accepting our master password. The enterprise clients in London just lost connection to their cloud databases. We're getting 80,000 support tickets a second. Mr. Vance. Mr. Vance, where are the source code recovery keys? Carter Vance stood in the center of the control room, his tailored shirt rumpled, his hair disheveled, clutching a cup of lukewarm espresso with shaking hands. What do you mean the keys aren't working? Carter roared, his voice cracking with hysteria. The keys were registered under the corporate administrator account. Just enter the override sequence. The chief technical officer, a man Carter had hired 3 months ago to replace my former lab director, turned around with a face the color of wet paper. The override sequence was Chloe Miller's biometric signature. Carter, the CTO, shouted, his professional composure completely shattered. The algorithms weren't written in standard C++. They were compiled using her proprietary quantum mathematical library. Without her active licensing token, the entire architecture encrypts itself as a security precaution against corporate theft. Then crack it, Carter screamed, slamming his cup against the wall, shattering the ceramic and splattering coffee across the floor. We have 80 senior engineers in this building. What the hell do I pay you for? Break the encryption. Are you insane? The CTO yelled back, throwing his security badge onto the desk. Break a 4096-bit post-quantum lattice encryption created by a Fields Medal nominee. It would take the world's fastest supercomputer 400 years to brute force a single subroutine. We don't own this technology, Carter. We never owned it. Chloe Miller was the technology. The heavy glass doors of the operations center swung open. Richard and Eleanor Vance rushed in, flanked by 4 senior board members whose faces were twisted in pure, unbridled panic. Carter, Richard bellowed, his hands trembling as he shoved an iPad into his son's chest. The banks have frozen our operational credit line. They're demanding immediate collateral for the $30 million short-term bond, maturing on Friday. And Sterling Industrial just filed an emergency lawsuit in the Delaware Chancery Court. Eleanor shrieked, her voice reaching a shrill, piercing frequency. They're suing us for $80 million in commercial damages for breach of contract. Carter, where is Haley? Call her grandfather. Tell him, we need the emergency liquidity right now. Carter let out a ragged, terrifying laugh that made the engineers in the room back away in disgust. Haley, Carter whispered, tears of rage and humiliation leaking from his bloodshot eyes. Haley is currently being interrogated by the Financial Crimes Unit at the precinct. Old Man Bennett disowned her this morning. She doesn't have a penny, mother. She played us like a pack of starving dogs. Eleanor staggered backward, her hand flying to her heart, her knees buckling, until she hit the edge of a workstation. No, that's impossible. Eleanor whimpered. We are the Vance family. We were going to be the richest dynasty in the city. The central intercom of the building suddenly buzzed with a sharp, high-pitched chime. The robotic voice of the building management system echoed across every floor. Attention all departments. Notice of immediate eviction and asset seizure has been served by Brooks Capital Management under Section 4 of the Commercial Lease Default Covenant. All personnel are instructed to vacate the premises within 60 minutes. Carter looked up at the ceiling speakers, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The building didn't belong to the Vance family either. I had bought the commercial mortgage through Julian's holding firm 5 years ago, leasing it back to Vance Tech for a nominal fee of $1 a year, so Carter wouldn't feel insecure about working in his wife's shadow. Every brick, every server rack, every marble tile beneath his feet had been my gift to him. And now, the landlord was calling the debt. By Thursday afternoon, the public scandal had evolved into a full-scale corporate autopsy. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office announced a formal indictment against Haley Bennett for 12 counts of grand larceny, corporate identity theft, and felony aggravated assault resulting in grievous bodily harm to a pregnant woman. At the central precinct, behind the reinforced glass of the holding facility, Haley sat in an orange jumpsuit. Her manicured acrylic nails had been clipped, her extensions tangled and greasy, her face stripped of all cosmetics to reveal the sallow, terrified features of a 22-year-old girl who had gambled with high-stakes players and lost every chip. Carter sat on the other side of the glass, wearing a wrinkled Uniron suit, his eyes hollowed out like 2 burnt craters. The pregnancy, Carter said, his voice flat, dead, devoid of all inflection. Is the baby mine? Haley looked at him, and for the first time, there was no sweetness, no pout, no breathy innocence in her eyes. There was only the ugly, venomous sneer of a cornered scavenger. Your baby. Haley laughed, a harsh, grating sound that made the guard near the door clench over. Carter, you pathetic old fool. Do you really think a girl my age would let an impotent, balding middle manager with a failing company touch her without protection? Carter's knuckles whitened against the metal counter. You swore it was mine. You made me quit smoking. You told me we were building a family. I bought a positive pregnancy test off an online forum for $50, you idiot. Haley spat, pressing her face against the glass. I needed you to divorce Chloe before the end of the quarter, so I could get my hands on the corporate equity before my grandfather found out about my credit card debts. I thought you were smart enough to control her patents. Who knew you were just a brainless puppet who couldn't even log into his own company's servers without his wife holding his hand. Carter sat frozen. Every memory of the last 6 months flashed before his eyes. The fake ultrasounds, the sweet whispers in his office, the arrogance with which he had looked down at me and said, "0 shares for you, Chloe. Vance Tech belongs to my family." He had traded an authentic, peerless queen who had dragged him out of the gutter for a cheap, counterfeit toy that was laughing in his face while the prison doors slammed shut. "You ruined me," Carter whispered. "You ruined yourself, Carter," Haley sneered as the guard tapped her shoulder to lead her back to the cells. "You were nothing before her, and you're nothing without her. Enjoy the gutter." 3 months later, the grand ballroom of the Mandarin Oriental overlooking Central Park was illuminated by the cool, architectural glow of cyan laser ribbons and floating holographic displays. Over 600 international venture capitalists, sovereign wealth fund managers, and foreign tech delegates filled the auditorium. Tonight was the global launch of Novatech Systems, the new sovereign quantum infrastructure firm founded by Chloe Miller. I stood backstage, looking at my reflection in the full-length mirror. I wore an empire waist gown of midnight blue silk, tailored by a Parisian couturier to drape gracefully over my 7-month baby bump. My hair was swept into a regal, polished chignon secured with a hairpin carved of white jade. Around my neck sat no diamonds, only the slim, platinum chain holding the cryptographic hardware token of my new patent suite. My skin was radiant, the dark circles from 8 years of overwork completely gone, replaced by the calm, terrifying poise of a woman who had passed through the fire and returned with the ashes of her enemies in her palm. "Ms. Miller," Julian's assistant whispered, opening the velvet curtain. "The live stream has hit 4 million concurrent viewers. The Secretary of Commerce has just taken his seat in the front row." "Thank you, David," I said softly. I walked onto the stage. The applause that greeted me was not polite, it was deafening. The entire auditorium stood up, a standing ovation from the titans of global finance, welcoming the undisputed sovereign of modern computing back to her throne. I stepped up to the minimalist glass podium, raising my hand. The room fell into an instantaneous, breathless hush. 8 years ago, I began, my voice clear, melodious, and carrying to every corner of the hall. I believed that technology was meant to serve individuals. I believed that loyalty was a currency that could sustain an enterprise. I touched the holographic interface on the podium. A 3-dimensional map of the global optical communication grid bloomed into the air above the audience, glowing in brilliant, unshakable gold. "I was wrong," I said, a faint razor-sharp smile touching the corners of my lips. "Technology does not serve individuals. It serves vision. And starting tonight, Novatech will deploy the world's first decentralized quantum core across 48 sovereign data centers, operating under a fully transparent, non-revocable public trust." The auditorium erupted into furious note-taking and wild applause. Before I could continue, a commotion broke out at the main entrance of the ballroom. The double doors were shoved open. Carter Vance, looking like a beggar who had slept in an alleyway, fought his way past 2 private security guards, his coat torn, his face haggard and drenched in sweat. Behind him, Eleanor and Richard Vance were being restrained by hotel security, Eleanor screaming incoherently about marital assets and filial duty. "Chloe," Carter screamed, his voice cracking with sheer, unhinged desperation as he stumbled down the central carpeted aisle toward the stage. "Chloe, look at me. I know I was wrong. I was poisoned by that girl. Please, look at our 8 years. Look at the child you're carrying." The security team moved in to tackle him, but I raised my left hand, gesturing for them to pause. The cameras of 40 international media networks swung around, focusing their lenses on the ruined, kneeling figure of my ex-husband in the center of the aisle. Carter fell onto his knees, crawling forward 3 feet, his hands outstretched toward the stage like a starving man begging for bread. "Chloe, Vance Tech was liquidated yesterday," Carter wept, his forehead pressing against the carpet, his tears soaking into the wool. "The banks took the house. They took my father's car. We're living in a $600 motel in New Jersey. We have nothing left to eat. You are my wife. That baby in your belly is my son. You can't be this cruel." I looked down from the stage. I looked at the man who had stood in his office 3 months ago, looking at his expensive shoes, telling me that I was trailer trash who deserved 0 shares of the company I had built with my own blood. I felt no rage. I felt no triumph. I felt only the cold, immaculate indifference one feels when looking at a dead insect on a windshield. I leaned into the microphone. "Mr. Vance," I said, my voice carrying with crystal clarity across the silent hall and into the living rooms of 4 million viewers worldwide. "You seem to be confused." I rested my hand gently over my baby bump. "This child's name is Miller. He will inherit 42 international patents, a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, and an unblemished name. He will grow up, knowing that his mother dragged herself out of poverty with her own mind, and that his biological father was merely an expensive clerical error that was corrected in the third quarter. The audience gasped, followed by several audible snickers from the investment bankers in the second row. I looked at the lead security officer. Please remove these trespassers from the building. They are disturbing our investors. 4 armed guards hoisted Carter by his arms. He thrash-screamed like a dying animal, his shoes dragging against the carpet as they hauled him toward the exit. Chloe, please. Give me 1 patent. Just 1 license. I'll die in the street, Chloe. I'll die in the street. The heavy soundproof doors of the ballroom slammed shut, cutting off his pathetic wails forever. I turned back to the audience, smoothed my midnight blue gown, and smiled. Now, gentlemen, I said, tapping the holographic display. Let us discuss the next 10 years of human progress. 2 months later, the first winter snow began to fall over Manhattan. Inside the penthouse suite of the Brooks Tower, the floor-to-ceiling glass walls looked out over the quiet, white blanket covering Central Park. A cedar fire crackled softly in the marble hearth, filling the room with warmth and the sweet scent of dry pine. I sat on the wide velvet chaise lounge, wearing a cream cashmere sweater, cradling my 2-week-old son in my arms. Liam Miller was fast asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling rhythmically against my collarbone, his soft, dark hair smelling of baby lotion and clean linen. The front door chimed softly. Julian walked in, carrying a leather briefcase and a box of fresh almond pastries from the bakery downtown. He had shucked his dark wool coat by the entryway, his eyes instantly softening the moment they found me and the baby by the fire. How was the municipal court hearing? I asked quietly, not wanting to wake the child. Julian sat on the edge of the chaise, leaning down to press a warm, gentle kiss against my temple before looking at Liam's sleeping face with unmistakable tenderness. Carter Vance was sentenced this morning, Julian said, his voice quiet. 3 years for corporate fraud and aiding and abetting in the Apex commercial forgery scheme. He'll serve his time at the State Correctional Facility in upstate New York. And Eleanor? She and Richard applied for municipal public housing in Queens yesterday. Julian replied, taking my free hand into his thumb tracing the smooth, unblemished skin of my fingers where the wedding ring used to sit. There. Living on Richard's monthly Social Security check of $900. Eleanor tried to pawn her fake pearl necklace this morning. The pawnbroker gave her $12 for the brass clasp. I looked down at Liam's peaceful face. The past had finally dissolved into dust, swept away by the cold winter wind, leaving behind only the solid, unshakable ground upon which we stood. Julian, I murmured, leaning my head against his shoulder. Yes, Chloe. Thank you. Julian smiled. A rare, genuine, breathtaking curve of his lips that held no corporate calculation, no dark shadows, only an infinite, unyielding warmth. He reached down, gently tucking the soft woolen blanket around our son's shoulders, his arm settling securely around my waist. You don't have to thank me, Chloe, Julian whispered, his fingers intertwining with mine. You built the kingdom. I'm just here to make sure nobody ever dares to cast a shadow over the sun. Outside the glass, the snow fell softly over the great city, white and clean, covering every ancient track and every broken promise, while inside, the fire burned bright and steady into the morning light.